Imagine a time when the person standing across the battlefield wasn't a stranger from a foreign land, but your own neighbor, your cousin, or even your brother. This was the American Civil War.
By 1860, the United States was really two different nations living under one flag. The North was filled with factories and railroads, while the South relied heavily on farming and slave labor.
At the heart of this growing tension was the institution of slavery. For the South, it was the backbone of their economy. For many in the North, it was a moral evil that had to end. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in November 1860, the fragile peace finally shattered. He won without a single Southern vote, proving to the South that they had lost their political power. Refusing to accept a president who opposed the expansion of slavery, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union in December. It was the first domino to fall in a tragic chain. Soon, 6 other states followed South Carolina's lead. Together, they formed a new nation called the Confederate States of America and elected Jefferson Davis as their president to lead them against the North. The tension finally exploded on April 12, 1861. Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. These were the first shots of a war that would last 4 bloody years. Across the divided land, young men rushed to enlist. Everyone thought the war would be a grand adventure, a short conflict that would be over by Christmas. They had no idea of the horror awaiting them.
The first major battle at Bull Run proved everyone wrong. The inexperienced Union Army was routed, fleeing back to Washington in a panic. Both sides realized this would not be a short or easy war.
Lincoln turned to General George McClellan to build a real army. McClellan was excellent at drilling soldiers and organizing supplies, but he was incredibly hesitant to actually take those soldiers into battle. Technology was changing warfare forever. In the waters off Virginia, 2 iron-plated ships, the Monitor and the Merrimac, clashed. It was a draw, but it signaled the end of the era of wooden warships. For the average soldier, life was mostly boredom mixed with hardship. They marched for miles in the rain, ate hard biscuits called hardtack, and suffered from diseases that killed more men than bullets did. In the West, the war was brutal. At the Battle of Shiloh, more Americans died in 2 days than in all previous American wars combined. It was a shocking wake-up call to the nation. The high death toll was partly due to the new mini-ball bullet. When fired from a rifled musket, it was accurate at long range and caused devastating, shattering wounds that often required amputation. In the East, the Confederacy found its greatest hero in Robert E. Lee. Though he loved the Union, he could not fight against his home state of Virginia. His tactical brilliance would prolong the war. In September 1862, Lee invaded the North. The armies clashed at Antietam Creek. It remains the single bloodiest day in American history, with over 23,000 casualties in just a few hours. Although Antietam was a draw, it gave Lincoln the political strength to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. This document declared that all slaves in rebel territory were free, changing the war's purpose to freedom. The proclamation opened the door for African Americans to fight. Over 180,000 black soldiers joined the Union Army, fighting bravely for their own freedom and the future of their people. Women played a crucial role too. Clara Barton and others braved the front lines to nurse the wounded. Their dedication revolutionized medical care and laid the foundation for the future American Red Cross. Despite larger Union numbers, Lee continued to win. At Chancellorsville, he divided his smaller army to defeat a much larger force. It was his greatest victory, but it came at a terrible, irreplaceable cost. During the battle, Lee's right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson, was accidentally shot by his own troops in the dark. His death was a devastating blow to the Confederacy, one they would never truly recover from. Desperate for a decisive victory to end the war, Lee invaded the North again in the summer of 1863. The 2 massive armies collided, almost by accident, at a small town called Gettysburg. The battle began on July 1st. Confederate forces drove Union defenders back through the town, but the Union troops managed to regroup and hold the high ground south of town, setting the stage for battle. On the second day, fierce fighting erupted. On a hill called Little Round Top, a brave bayonet charge by Union troops from Maine saved the Union line from collapsing, preserving their position. On day 3, Lee ordered a massive assault known as Pickett's Charge. Thousands of Confederates marched across open fields into deadly Union fire. The attack failed disastrously, marking the turning point of the war.
While Gettysburg raged, General Ulysses S. Grant was besieging Vicksburg in the west. This city was the key to the Mississippi River. Grant starved the city into submission, trapping the Confederate army inside.
On July 4, 1863, Vicksburg surrendered. The very same day, Lee began his retreat from Gettysburg. These twin victories for the Union marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Months later, Lincoln visited the Gettysburg battlefield. In a 2-minute speech, he redefined the war, stating that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, ensuring democracy would not perish. Lincoln finally found a general who would fight. He promoted Grant to lead all Union armies. Grant's strategy was simple but brutal: use the North's superior numbers to grind the Confederate army down.
Grant launched the Overland Campaign in Virginia. The fighting in the wilderness was horrific, with woods catching fire. Unlike previous generals, even after taking heavy losses, Grant did not retreat. He pressed on.
The war turned into a grim slugfest. At Cold Harbor, Union soldiers pinned their names to their uniforms so their bodies could be identified, knowing they were marching into certain death against entrenched rebels. Grant eventually pinned Lee down at Petersburg. For 9 months, the two armies lived in trenches, a precursor to World War I. It was a siege of patience, artillery, and slow starvation for the South. While Grant held Lee in Virginia, General William Tecumseh Sherman advanced in the west toward Atlanta. He believed in total war, aiming to break the spirit of the Southern people, not just their army. In September 1864, Atlanta fell to Sherman. This was a massive blow to the Confederacy's industrial center and provided a much-needed morale boost to the weary Northern public just before the election. The capture of Atlanta ensured Lincoln's re-election in 1864. With the people voting to see the war through to the end, the Confederacy's last hope for a negotiated peace vanished completely. Sherman then cut his supply lines and marched his army to the sea. They created a path of destruction 60 miles wide, destroying food, barns, and railroads to prove the Confederacy could not protect its citizens. Sherman's men twisted railroad tracks around trees, calling them Sherman's neckties. This total war strategy was controversial but effective, crippling the South's ability to move supplies and devastating their economy. By April 1865, Lee's lines at Petersburg broke. The Confederate government fled their capital, Richmond. Union troops entered the city to find it burning, set on fire by the retreating Confederates themselves. Lee tried to escape west to join other forces, but Grant cut him off at every turn. His soldiers were starving, shoeless, and exhausted. Lee realized that further fighting would only mean useless slaughter. On April 9, 1865, in the parlor of the McLean House at Appomattox, Robert E. Lee met with Ulysses S. Grant. The two great generals met to discuss the terms of surrender. Grant offered generous terms. Confederate soldiers would not be imprisoned for treason. They could keep their horses for spring plowing and go home. Grant wanted to heal the nation, not punish the defeated. As the Confederates laid down their arms, Union soldiers began to cheer, but Grant ordered them to stop. He said, "The war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again." The healing had begun. But the joy of victory was short-lived. Just 5 days after the surrender, President Lincoln was attending a play at Ford's Theater. An actor and Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, crept into his box. Lincoln was assassinated, the first American president to be murdered. The nation plunged into deep mourning. The man who had held the Union together through its darkest hour would not live to lead the peace. The Civil War remains the deadliest conflict in American history. Over 600,000 men died, roughly 2% of the population. Almost every family in the North and South had lost someone dear. Yet, the war accomplished what many thought impossible. It preserved the Union and ended the institution of slavery. The United States was no longer a collection of states, but one singular, indivisible nation.
The scars of the Civil War took generations to heal, but they defined the America we know today. If you enjoyed this history, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from the past.